Hello, everyone. We're traveling through Genesis, practicing our Hebrew. This is episode 5 in the stories of Abram. We're in Genesis 15. In the previous episode, Abram had to go to battle to rescue his nephew Lot. So this episode opened with God making promises to Abram about protecting him. Then Abram replied, going back to another promise that God had made, and basically saying, well, what's with the promise of having an heir? Because I don't have one yet. And then this passage starts with Vayomer Avram. Abram said. Of course, Abram was the last person to speak in the first section of this episode. God made the promise. Abram asked a question. So why do we have to introduce Vayomer Avram again? Well, this is because it's a different speech act. There's been some time in between what Abram said before and what Abram has said now. He feels like he hasn't gotten an answer as quickly as he wants, and so he repeats himself. And you'll notice he uses the particle hain. Hain li, lo natata zara. Look at me. Hain is very much like hine. Hine gets used with participles that are used verbally, and hain does not, but everything else about them seems to be the same. It's a deictic particle. He's drawing attention to himself. Look at me. Look at my situation. Lo natata zara. This is from Natan, and normally we don't see that mater hey on the end. The noon of Natan has become the dagesh forte in the second tav there, and the ending is ta from ata. It's 2ms. He's making an accusation. You have not given me seed, a descendant. By implication here, of course, it means an heir. You haven't given me an heir. No offspring. Vihene, so again, the deictic particle drawing attention to this circumstance. Ven veti yoresh oti. Previously, he referred to Eliezer as Ben Mesek, the son of the stuff of my house. Now he just says son of my house. We talked about last time how son is a term of relationship. Or Ben is a term of relationship, doesn't always mean son. So what it means here isn't quite clear. A lot of translations will say, oh, someone born in my household, because it's obviously not his son. But because of all the other things that Ben can mean, it might mean something simple like an employee, right? Somebody who is attached to my household. And then we have the verb yoresh, OT. And when we look at yoresh, it could actually be a couple of different things. What's the root? Well, the root is yarash, and perhaps we see all of those letters there, a yod, a resh, a shin, and then we've got cholam vav after R1. So that could be a kal active participle. Look, an employee is about to inherit my stuff, take possession of my stuff. On the other hand, the vav that we see in the cholam vav could be the first radical because yarash was originally first vav. That would make the yod an imperfect prefix. And then what would give us a cholam after the imperfect prefix? Well, if R1 is actually originally Vav, Vav would turn into Cholam if it combined with an A-class vowel, such as a patak. If we had the prefix over patak, that would be the hifil stem, and so that could be a 3ms hifil imperfect by form, just like it could be a kal participle, a masculine singular, by form. And this happens to be a root where, at least in English, we're going to translate the same way, whether it's kal or hifil. Take possession of, dispossess, and inherit the stuff of, take over the inheritance. But the meaning in this case, where it's a simple inheritance process and not something more involved or forceful like a takeover, it's probably the kal participle. So an employee will succeed me, kind of colloquially in English there. Now the narrator uses vihine, drawing the audience into an awareness that the Lord now responds. So vihine devar Adonai elaiv lemor. And then get this, and you know what? Guess what happened next? Because before, when Abram asked the question, there was no answer, at least no immediate answer. Then a certain amount of time, and maybe he's getting more frustrated. He asks again. And then, get this, the Lord's message came to him. So what did it say? Lo yirashekha zeh. He will not dispossess you or take over your inheritance. And now when we look at that vowel and we see chirik yod instead of tsere, we can say to ourselves, oh, this is the kal verb. And so, yeah, indeed, that's also going to sway us back there in verse 3 that yoresh was the kal participle. So this guy you're talking about, is not going to be the one that inherits your stuff. And ki-im, remember those two work together. Ki is sort of like indeed here, and im is an alternative. So indeed the alternative, better English, but rather. This one will not succeed you, but rather asher yetze mime'eka. So someone, and now we're in a relative clause, someone yetze, who will come out mime'eka, or mime'eka, from your loins, from your body, a biological descendant. And yetze, the root is yod sadi aleph, but the yod that you see is not R1. That yod is the imperfect prefix. The yod that was R1 has become that sere under the yod that you see, because we had that yod was closing a syllable sitting over top of a silent shavah. And so it contracted with the previous vowel and gave us this form. And so then, after drawing attention to, and it's going to be your biological heir, we refer back to that phrase with the pronoun who, and then we have yirasheka, where the pausal form gives us a full vowel under that shin, whereas 2 lines earlier we just had a vocal shavah. Rather, one who comes from your own body, he will be your heir, or he will succeed you. And then we have an action. God still is addressing Abram, and he's doing it in 3 phases. So the first phase is this assurance is going to be your biological heir. Then, vayotse oti hachutza. So vav patak dagesh on the front, preterite. The dagesh is in a yod, so third masculine. There's no u at the end, so third masculine singular. And then we've got that vav there, because this also is originally first vav. All right, we learn it as yatsa, but it's originally first vav. Why did it become the cholam vav? All right, vav, when it combines with a previous A-class vowel, turns into cholam vav. So the previous A-class vowel meant which stem? The hifil. So yatsa is to go out. The hifil is to cause or to influence, to do whatever's in the kal. So God is causing him to go out, and then chachutza, he's bringing him outside. Right? And we would say God brought him or led him outside, something like that in English. Vayomer, and he said, Habetna hashemayama. Usafor hakokavim im tukal lispor otam. So, we imagine that this is a gentle speaking, however it is happening in his mind, in a vision, audibly, whatever, a gentle tone of voice, directing his attention to the sky. Habet, we may not recognize that root. Let's see if we can pull it apart. Nothing at the end. You've got hey patak dagesh on the front. Is that an article? Well, that's what an article would look like, but followed by na, we're expecting a verb and we're expecting an imperative. So what we've had go on there is the hey of the hifil over a patak, because this is an imperative and not a perfect. And then the first radical is Nun. Nun was sitting over Silent Shabbat, became that Dagesh Forte in the Bet. So even though that's a Dagesh Forte in the second radical, preceded by a letter with a patak, it's also not a PL, right? Because the patak is not under the first radical. The patak is under the prefix. So we have a hifil imperative, 2ms, followed by na, please, polite form. Abram, please look to the sky. Right? Please look at the sky. And usafor hakokavim, and count the stars. So we have Sephor, which is identical in form to the infinitive construct. But let's remind ourselves again what usually marks an infinitive construct. Right, it's usually preceded by a preposition or a time word, and it's not preceded by either of those in this case. Of course, 6% of them or so are not, but we're also in direct speech, and we just followed an imperative, so pretty easy to recognize. Look to the sky. Count the stars. Im tu kal lispor otam, if you're able to count them. Remember, this is from Yakol, and that's also originally first Vav. This is the only one which in the Kal will turn into that Shurik after the prefix. Otherwise, it would look rather like a Hofal. So if you are able to count them, and then there's time that passes before we have Vayomer Lo again. How much time? Well, we don't know, but the point is, especially if we're making a movie out of this, we've got to give Abram, the character, time to look up at the sky, maybe turn the camera up to the sky, see how many stars there are on a presumably clear night. Couldn't have done this on a cloudy day, right? On a presumably clear night when there's no city lights that are interfering with our ability to see the stars. And so we would just spend some time taking it in. There's so many stars. Count them if you're able to count them. Vayomer lo ko ya zareka. And then he said to him, so the Lord is speaking to Abram again, thus will be your seed. So we started this episode with God making a promise of protection to Abram. Abram shifted the focus to a different promise that God had made in the past. And so our chapter is unfolding with God addressing that question that Abram has posed to him. And it does it in somewhat dramatic fashion. It has let Abram stew on it a little bit, ask him the question a second time, then assures him, no, it's going to be your biological heir, and I want to astound you. So takes him outside, looks at the sky. That's what it's going to be like for you.